A neighbor closes a cupboard 3 apartments down. Your heart races, you freeze. Was that a missile? The rumble of everyday life has become a trigger for terror. In Dubai's glittering towers, families huddle in windowless bathrooms, while air defense systems light up the sky. Children cry. Phones buzz with messages from abroad. Are you safe? Should you leave? In Bahrain, black smoke stains the horizon. In Abu Dhabi, people queue for chicken and bananas like they're precious metals. Welcome to February 2026, where 5 days of war have shattered the foundational myth of the modern Middle East. The Gulf states spent half a century constructing an image, islands of stability in a sea of chaos. Dubai built itself on a promise that war stopped at its borders. Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Doha. These weren't just cities, they were brands. Safety, luxury, certainty, business as usual while the rest of the region burned. Except now, the usual is gone. The fires have jumped the border. And the question isn't whether this changes the Middle East forever. The question is whether there's anything left unchanged at all. Reuters correspondent Andrew Mills and his colleagues aren't just reporting this story. They're living it, listening to volleys of intercepted missiles above their homes, calculating exit routes through desert highways that are themselves under attack. The region's airspace is closed. There's no easy escape. Every journalist, every expatriate, every local family faces the same brutal calculus: stay or go. And if go, how? Federico Maccioni, working in Dubai's finance sector, noticed something he'd never felt before: doubt. Not panic, not yet, but a hairline fracture in the city's legendary confidence. Then there's Rachna Uppal in Abu Dhabi, watching something equally surreal: people shopping, getting their teeth cleaned, jet skiing. Life continuing with an eerie normalcy while missiles arc overhead. Now I want you to pause and think about where you are right now. This is Professor Archive, and we dig into the moments that reshape our world. Before we go further into what may be the most consequential week in Gulf history since oil was discovered, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from and what time is it there? Are you a student? A history teacher? Someone who lived through regional conflicts? I'm genuinely curious who's on this journey with us today. Let me take you back to understand what makes this so catastrophic. The Gulf's entire modern existence rests on 2 pillars. 2 assumptions so fundamental that no one seriously questioned them. First, the Gulf is safe. Whatever happens in Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, or Tehran, the Gulf is different. Protected, insulated. Second, the oil and gas keeps flowing. Always. Without interruption. Wealth keeps pouring in to fund the mega projects, the sovereign wealth funds, the generous social contracts that keep populations content. 5 days in late February 2026 took a sledgehammer to both pillars simultaneously. Iranian drones and missiles didn't just strike military targets, they hit the Burj Al Arab. They hit data centers processing billions in financial transactions. They struck Dubai International Airport, one of the world's busiest. They set the port of Fujairah ablaze, and days later it's still burning. Hundreds of oil tankers sit idle in the waters nearby with nowhere safe to go. This isn't precision military strategy. This is psychological warfare targeting the very soul of what these cities claim to be. Picture the UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed strolling through Dubai Mall on Monday evening. The cameras capture him relaxed, confident, projecting absolute calm. It's February 28th, 2026. The message is clear: we're fine. Everything is under control. But outside that mall, the reality tells a different story. Flight boards show cancellation after cancellation. Financial markets are shuttered. The sky rumbles with air defense systems intercepting the next wave. People aren't strolling through luxury stores. They're stockpiling rice and formula. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Stop and absorb that for a moment. Roughly 20% of the world's petroleum passes through that narrow waterway. It's the jugular vein of global energy. And it's severed. Qatar Energy, the liquefied natural gas giant that supplies 1/5 of the world's LNG, has shut down operations. Think about their record. They had never, not once, missed a shipment. That streak is broken. Iraq has slashed production. Saudi Arabia is desperately trying to reroute crude through alternative pipelines, but the capacity isn't there. The price of oil, natural gas, and energy-related commodities has exploded upward. Here's what makes this especially painful for the Gulf states. Their entire diversification strategy, everything they've built outside of oil, depends on oil money. Saudi Vision 2030, funded by oil revenue. Dubai's transformation into a global financial hub, built on a foundation of hydrocarbon wealth from Abu Dhabi. Qatar hosting the World Cup, building museums and universities. LNG money, the social contracts keeping populations peaceful. Government jobs, subsidies, generous benefits, all paid for by energy exports. When the energy stops flowing, or even when the world fears it might stop flowing permanently, the entire model wobbles. And some wobbles, as the Reuters team notes grimly, cannot be undone. Let's talk about tourism. Dubai welcomed over 17 million visitors in 2024. The city built its economy around being the Middle East's playground, conference center, and connection hub. Who's booking a holiday to a missile target? Who's scheduling a corporate conference in a city where attendees might need to shelter in place? The damage to brand perception is potentially catastrophic. Even if the war ends tomorrow, how long before a family from London or Mumbai thinks, yes, let's take the kids to Dubai for spring break? The financial sector is equally vulnerable. Free zones filled with regional headquarters for multinational corporations chose Dubai or Abu Dhabi because they offered stability, connectivity, and ease of doing business. But corporations plan for risk. When your regional HQ requires employees to track air raid protocols and you're losing workdays to market closures and flight cancellations, suddenly Cairo starts looking more stable. Istanbul becomes more attractive. The competitive advantage evaporates. But here's the deeper, more profound shift: the relationship between Iran and the Arab Gulf states. For years, there'd been a delicate dance happening. Saudi Arabia and Iran, mortal rivals since 1979, had started talking again. The UAE reopened its embassy in Tehran. Oman had always maintained ties. These weren't friendships, but they were pragmatic acknowledgments of reality. Iran is across the Gulf. It's not going anywhere. Neither are the Arab states. Geography is permanent. Maybe the thinking went, coexistence is possible. Maybe economic interdependence could build trust. Maybe the next generation could see a different Middle East. That's over, finished, dead. Iran didn't strike military facilities on the periphery or engage in limited symbolic attacks. They attacked civilian infrastructure in 6 different U.S.-aligned Gulf states simultaneously. Hotels, shopping districts, data centers. These attacks weren't designed to achieve tactical military advantages. They were designed to send a message. We can reach you anywhere, anytime. Your wealth, your cities, your claims to be different from the rest of the region. All illusions we can shatter. The political space that Gulf leaders had carefully carved out for dialogue with Iran has collapsed. Imagine you're the ruler of Kuwait or Bahrain. Your parliament and public are demanding answers, demanding protection. Demanding retaliation, or at minimum, guarantees it won't happen again. How do you return to the negotiating table with Iran after this? How do you explain renewed diplomatic ties to a population that just spent 5 days in bomb shelters? The answer, according to analysts watching this unfold, is that you don't. The era of hedging with Iran, of trying to balance relationships between Washington and Tehran, of attempting regional dialogue despite differences, that era is over. We're entering what one analyst called a long hostile freeze. Think about what that means for the next generation. For the last decade, there was at least the possibility of gradual normalization. Young Iranians and young Emiratis or Saudis might never be close friends, but they could be business partners. They could collaborate on environmental issues, on managing shared water resources, on controlling dust storms that don't respect borders. All those potential futures, those paths not taken, just got cut off. The Middle East is returning to its Cold War posture, but with a twist. During most of the late 20th century, the Gulf states could rely on the United States as an ultimate security guarantor. American bases, American technology, American promises. But this attack happened despite U.S. presence in the region. Despite American air defense systems, despite decades of security partnerships, the drones got through. If you're a Gulf leader looking at this wreckage, you're asking hard questions. Can Washington actually protect us? Should we be developing our own capabilities? Should we be looking to other partners, Russia, China, India? Should we be reconsidering our entire security architecture? And if the old assumptions don't hold, what exactly are we building toward? There's a human dimension to this that often gets lost in geopolitical analysis. Journalists like Mills describe the new mental calculus everyone in the region is running. Where are the windows in your apartment? If one blows in, where's the shrapnel going? Where's the interior room with no windows? Do you have enough water stored? Batteries? Flashlights? What's the evacuation route, and is it actually viable when highways are being targeted? Parents are having conversations with their children that they never imagined, trying to explain why the booms aren't fireworks, why we can't go outside right now, why flying to grandma's house isn't possible at the moment. Expatriate communities that came to the Gulf for opportunity, for adventure, for tax-free salaries and sunshine are wondering if it's worth it. If their employment contracts have a clause for this, if their companies will evacuate them. The Gulf's population includes millions of foreign workers from South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Philippines, East Africa. For many, going home isn't a simple option. The jobs back home don't exist or don't pay enough to support extended families. They're trapped by economic necessity in the impact zone of a war that isn't theirs, but that threatens them all the same. And what about the Iranians? This didn't happen in a vacuum. From Tehran's perspective, this is retaliation, response, deterrence. The narrative there is entirely different. Years of sanctions, years of isolation, regional developments they view as threatening. This complexity doesn't excuse civilian attacks, but it's essential context. Wars don't have one story. They have as many stories as they have participants and victims. What no one disputes is that the Middle East of March 2026 is fundamentally different from the Middle East of February 2026. You can't unring this bell. Even if a ceasefire is signed tomorrow, even if diplomats craft some settlement, the psychological impact persists. The Gulf's brand as a safe haven, damaged, perhaps irreparably. The assumption that energy flows will continue uninterrupted, shaken. The possibility of gradual regional integration and dialogue, set back by years, maybe decades. Investors globally are recalculating Gulf risk premiums. Insurance companies are adjusting rates. Corporations are reviewing their regional strategies. Airlines are redrawing route maps. All the careful planning, all the visionary city building, all the billions spent on global marketing campaigns. None of it matters if the fundamental proposition of safety no longer holds. Before we wrap up, and if you found this analysis valuable, if Professor Archive is giving you insights you're not getting elsewhere, consider hitting the Super Thanks button. It genuinely helps us keep researching, keep diving deep into the stories that matter, keep avoiding the clickbait and bringing you substance instead. Your support, whether it's a like, a comment, a share, or a Super Thanks, makes this channel possible. So, could this war change the Middle East forever? The honest answer is it already has. The question isn't whether change is coming. The question is what shape that change takes. Does the Gulf enter a prolonged period of fortress mentality, militarization, and isolation? Do the Arab states and Iran find a way back from the brink before this spirals into something even worse? Do external powers get drawn in deeper, or do they step back? Does this fragment the region further, or does crisis sometimes breed unexpected cooperation? History teaches us that wars often accelerate changes that were already underway beneath the surface. The Gulf states were already questioning their dependence on the United States, already diversifying their partnerships, already grappling with how to transition away from hydrocarbon dependence, already confronting questions about Iran. This war didn't create those tensions, it detonated them. What happens next depends on choices made in the coming days and weeks. In Tehran, in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, in Washington, in Moscow, in Beijing. Choices about escalation, or de-escalation, retaliation, or restraint, dialogue or division. The Middle East has been through wars before. It's survived invasions, revolutions, oil shocks, and uprisings. It's proven remarkably resilient and remarkably tragic in equal measure. But this time feels different, because it strikes at the heart of the Gulf's modern identity. These aren't ancient cities that have weathered storms for millennia. These are new creations built in a single generation on the promise of being different, better, apart from the region's conflicts. That promise is burning in Fujairah's port right now. It's falling from the sky in missile fragments. It's hiding in the stairwells with frightened families. Whether the Middle East can rebuild that promise or whether it must forge an entirely new one is the story we'll be watching unfold. The story we're living through. and the story that will define this region for decades to come. This is Professor Archive, reminding you that history isn't just what happened in dusty textbooks. It's happening right now. It's being written in the decisions of today that become the headlines of tomorrow and the chapters of decades from now. Stay curious, stay informed, and remember that every seismic shift in human civilization started with a single moment when the world held its breath and wondered, what comes next?